Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. You know, that's the best present I've gotten today on my 25th birthday. Thank you very, very much. So let's get to work. Welcome to everyone in the room. Welcome to everyone streaming across the globe. For those of you who may not be on my email blast going out every Thursday telling you what's going to transpire here in this room, please go over to the book table today. There are clipboards with green sheets. Would love to have your contact information, and I'll send you a love letter every Thursday to tell you what's going on here. At All Saints Church, we put our faith into action, and we ask you to go by the action table today. If you have not already, we're focusing on solitary confinement, and the fact of the matter is that it is torture, and we think that our worship is made complete when we take action, either in your own way or certainly corporately here on campus. So please drop by the action table and sign a thank you letter to Attorney General Loretta Lynch, who has included that part in a recent report. If you would like to help us undergird our ministries here with your generosity, we would love to receive your money. There are pledge cards at every table on the campus, and no pledge is too small, no pledge is too great. We take $10 pledges, we take $10 million pledges. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank Progressive Christians Uniting for helping us bring James Carroll here today. He is speaking tonight under their direction on Pope Francis' Laudato Si and the flourishing of creation. That will be at 7 p.m. at Holy Name of Mary Catholic Church on East Bonita Avenue, San Dimas at 7 p.m. You will be grateful that I invited you to go when you go and hear him. Before I introduce him, I want to sell books. I want to hold up as a talisman this amazing, tear-stained, outlined book that is one of the most 5 important nonfiction books I have ever read, out of which I've been preaching for almost 20 years. It is James Carroll's book, Constantine's Sword, and you can purchase a paperback copy of it today, along with the National Book Award-winning An American Requiem, his memoir about his relationship with God, the Roman Catholic Church, his being a priest and leaving that, the Vietnam War, and his father, and how the war came between him and his father. More recently, Jim is a brilliant novelist, and so I recommend you're buying and reading all of his novels. His latest is Warburg in Rome. And then finally, his explication of who Jesus is, called Christ Actually. All of these books are available for your purchase, and I promise you, you will never, ever, ever be disappointed in reading them. I could go on and on and on, and probably will in a book or something, about the importance of Jim Carroll to me and to us at All Saints. But I do want to tell you this story. So 2 Friday nights ago, all of the people who have served as wardens during my 21 years came together for a little party. 22 wonderful people. And each of them had a chance to come and stand beside me and in their pairs and tell about what had happened when they were wardens at All Saints Church. And it was really quite a history lesson, not only the history of Christianity and at All Saints Church, but also the history of this country. And the senior warden who was the man who was my senior warden on 9/11, with whom I had breakfast right after the towers came down, told the story about how the very next Sunday, I preached a sermon about how the Bush administration made a fatal moral category mistake by claiming that that was war instead of international criminal act, and that set us on the path of this horrible international foreign policy thing called perpetual war that America has been in since 2001. And so Charlie McBride was going on and on and on about what a great moral call that was, and how he was such a great moral leader, and that led us to have a resolution against the Iraq War later, and also was the occasion of George Regas and me being arrested on Ash Wednesday and not being able to come to Ash Wednesday service because we were in jail, and on and on and on. The fact of the matter is, I plagiarized that phrase, category mistake, law, not war, from our speaker today. I read every word of his books, every word of his Boston Globe articles, and still am reading every word that he writes for the New Yorker. My friends, we have in our midst a public intellectual par excellence who eloquently and indictingly calls for moral reckoning for this country from the perspective of a prophet. Would you please welcome James Carroll?
Good morning. Well, I know that around here, my unlimited regard for Ed Bacon is a cliche. And I am thrilled to be part of what Lexa, my wife, and I told him last night we regard as his victory lap. Ed, thank you so much. Well, we don't have a lot of time. We adjourn at a little short at 11 o'clock. Okay. So what I treasure most about this forum and why I regard it as a privilege is to be able to have a conversation with you, who I associate myself in every way with you, and I hope I'm not presumptuous to do so. So I'm anxious for us to have a chance to talk. But let me put something on the table. When I talked to Ed and we talked about what we might lift up, I have been grappling with the meaning of Pope Francis, and it's timely to think of Pope Francis and the Christians United at Claremont. John Forney's my host there, invited me to talk about the larger meaning of his climate encyclical from last summer, which I'll be doing this evening. But I thought this might be a time to push a little bit beyond the usual categories within which Pope Francis is understood. And it's an expansion a little bit on the point I was making in the sermon. It's also a reflection on the large significance of his presence in Mexico right now. And even more so, the significance of his presence at the U.S.-Mexican border, which will take place, I think, on Wednesday. I'll begin by telling you a short anecdote. I had the privilege of being in Rome a while ago when I was first writing about Pope Francis, and I was privileged to be with a group of his friends in his presence. There were about 125,000 of us. I was actually invited to be in the second row on the high platform of St. Peter's Square. So you picture the scene, the great Bernini colonnade, which embraces that massive plaza, up from which come a massive, magnificent staircase up to the high platform at the entrance to St. Peter's, which you recall is not just the largest church in the world, it's twice as large as all of the other great cathedrals to which it might be compared. And on that high platform, the Pope presides, and he was in a chair about where the camera is from where I was standing. In front of me was one row of people. I was in the second row. And then after his remarks, he began to make a circuit around the row of people, greeting them. And it was clearly routine. Right in front of me, in the front row, was a very beautiful young couple, elegantly dressed. They were striking. When the Pope, who was greeting people warmly, approached them, I could see the woman take a deep breath. I was drawn to them, and I was watching them. She took a deep breath, and when the Pope turned to her, she leapt at him in a way that was unusual and put her mouth by his ear and spoke to him. And he came back like this and took the two of them into his embrace. And then he put his hands on the gentleman's head and held the woman in the embrace still. And then there was a profound silence that was stunning given the setting. And it was so striking that you could sense that the broad bustle all around began to settle as people waited. Before it settled, actually, the Pope moved on to the next people. Something had happened. I didn't know what. I was presumptuous, and after the audience broke up and people were beginning to move away, I went up to the couple, and the man was so given to the moment that he wasn't the one to approach. I spoke to the woman. I said, "Forgive me, but would you mind telling me what happened?" And she said, "My husband has a brain tumor." And I told Pope Francis, "We're from Argentina." And we came hoping to meet him. And I said something really stupid. I said something like, "So you're hoping for," I didn't use the word miracle, but that was kind of the drift of what I was asking. "So you're hoping for your husband to be cured." The woman kind of fell back in a kind of horror and swatted the thought away. She said, no, of course not. There is no curing. We simply wanted to be in his presence. And what I took from that was a movement away from religion. It wasn't looking for the miracle. And it also transformed my sense of what a blessing can be. And this woman's insistence, don't reduce what we're doing here to that kind of magic. We are changing the meaning of what we're dealing with. That's what we're doing here. And I understood that. And what I realized in thinking about this is actually what Pope Francis is inviting. He doesn't lead by exhortation, much less command. He leads by invitation. And what he's inviting is a change in the way we think of our own existence, which of course includes a change in the way we think of God. He has put it into words this way. The first reform, he says, is not in the structures of the church or the structures of belief or doctrine. The first reform must be in our attitude. If we can change our attitude about our experience and our situation, everything follows from that. And that's true even having to do with things that are impossible. It is impossible to adjust the structures of inequality in the planet today. It is impossible to solve, miraculously, the crisis of migration today. It is impossible, really, to roll back the damage that's been done to the environment of our planet by carbon emissions. So much is impossible, but what's not impossible is a change in the attitude we take about all of it. And that is what I realize in France. That is not the work of religion. That is a profoundly secular event. And I see in Francis the recovery from the church's great mistake. I associate it with the mistake at the time of Galileo, when the great leap in the human imagination was made, with Galileo as the symbol of it, that hard data, if you have hard data that contradicts an idea, the idea has to be reinterpreted because hard data must be respected. An observation of the movement of the heavenly bodies that contradicts Scripture means Scripture must be reinterpreted. And the church refused that invitation. And we haven't fully really recovered from it because it is the flip that takes place with the Enlightenment, which is that human experience weighs more than ideas. How do I know that I exist? Not because, as in the first verse of Genesis, in the beginning God told me. I know I exist. Well, I think, therefore I am. That's the Enlightenment motto. I think, therefore I am. Human experience of existence is how we know we exist. We don't get that revealed to us. We experience it. It begins there. Experience trumps doctrine. Experience trumps theology, ethics, and an ethical experience. If the church was complicit in the murder of 6 million Jews, the doctrine that supported that mistake must be turned over and rejected. How do we know it's time to end the anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic interpretation of our texts? Because the experience of the Holocaust made it necessary for us to do so. How do I know that no salvation outside the church has to go out the window? Because the experience of my neighbor, my wife, my brother-in-law, my co-worker, who is not a Catholic or not a Christian, my experience tells me they are beloved of God. Therefore, going to God is not a matter of belonging to any particular religion, and so forth. Experience over dogma. When Pope Francis is asked about gay people, his response, his now mythic response, "Who am I to judge?" is a shorthand manifestation of this. The experience I have of the goodness of my gay friends trumps any doctrine that tells me they are not good. This is what Dietrich Bonhoeffer was desperately reaching toward out of his experience of the collapse of meaning during the Holocaust, when he coined the phrase religionless Christianity, and understood that the place in which we see God's presence is not the church, but the world. Not in doctrine, but in experience. And then the church discovers its true purpose, which is not to make God available to people, but to simply lift up the fact of God's availability. And that's what Francis is doing. He's not a liberal. And this isn't, of course, his interpretation, it's mine. But it seems to explain why, so far beyond religion, he is drawing the attention of human beings from all walks of life and all ideologies, challenging, drawing disagreement, drawing sweeping rejection, actually, from within the church, within the hierarchy of the church, as well as from outside it, because of the power of the simple truth of his assertions. So that's why I regard his arrival as the most stunning turn in my own Catholic life since the arrival of Pope John. In Laudate Si, the encyclical from last summer, he wrote, "We are speaking of an attitude of the heart, one which approaches life with serene attentiveness, which is capable of being fully present to someone without thinking of what comes next, which accepts each moment as a gift from God to be lived to the full." So, what do you think of Pope Francis, my friends?
Who's helping me with the mics today? We usually applaud at this point.
You folks, you sure do what you're told, don't you?
Okay, raise your hand on this side, raise your hand on this side. We'll keep the mics going back and forth. We don't shout. Here's the first question, please. Don't shout out the question because of our streaming sisters and brothers from all over the world. Thank you. First question, please.
First of all, I really want to thank you for the sermon this morning. I thought it was amazing, overwhelming. As far as Pope Francis is concerned, I love him. I think he is wonderful. I have read his encyclical on the environment with great interest. I disagree with him on a number of issues, on the issue of abortion, on the issue of homosexuality, on his sort of neglect to recognize the contributions of women in many respects. So I think he is a gift from God, and I think he's human, and I think that needs to be said.
Well, thank you so much for that important statement. I'm glad you made it immediately. You remind us, of course, that he's a man of his culture, a man of his time, a man of the patriarchy, therefore, a man of the clerical culture. He does not at all get it about the importance of equal rights for women. He doesn't get it about the importance of dismantling the clerical structure, mandatory celibacy, male-only priesthood, the clergy a class apart and above, a caste, all of which is complicit in the grave crime of priestly sex abuse of children that has racked the Catholic Church. He doesn't get it. For me, all of this is not a matter of, quote, disappointment. It's a matter of, and you implied this, that's the wonder of the invitation we have from this person, because he is so palpably a human being. He is guilty of a very cowardly neutrality during the dirty war in Argentina, which he himself acknowledges. This is not a hero. and he is not a moral hero above the limits of his own situation. Despite his own situation, he's transcending it. And he is setting in motion a dynamic that will lead to gender equality and can lead to an authentic reform of the clerical state and can lead to an acceptance and affirmation of the full integrity and humanness of homosexual people. Because the refusal to judge, even while protecting the doctrinal denigration that might be the ground on which to judge, by refusing to judge, he is changing our attitude toward that doctrine. He is changing our attitude toward the disciplines and rules we've inherited. And that is the opening for change going forward. And he is generating change that will go beyond, I'm sure, anything he himself would personally approve of. Because he's not a liberal. This is the character of radical, moving to the root of the truth of our tradition. And that's what's to be celebrated. Other comments or questions?
Here's a question here. Please keep your hand up so he can find you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim, for being with us. We all appreciate your presence. To what extent do you think Pope Francis represents the liberation theology that has been common among South American clerics up to this point?
Well, he epitomizes it. And what's wonderful about his epitomizing liberation theology, which can be defined as that, the so-called preferential option for the poor, right, which is the slogan of liberation theology, amounts to that looking at things from below, looking at the meaning of ideas, experience, at the economy, at politics, at social class, looking at everything from the point of view of those at the mercy of it. And what's moving to me about his embrace, his clear embrace of this, is it doesn't come from an ideological conversion. He, as a young priest, was, from all that we know, opposed to liberation theology. He was a critic of the Jesuits who were on the cutting edge of the liberation theology movement. He was skeptical about it. He was afraid of it, by his own account. And what changed him was a kind of exile into the work among the poorest of the poor in Buenos Aires, when he became a priest of the barrio, a priest of the vast slumland in Buenos Aires, where he spent days every day, hours every day, among the people who had nothing in Buenos Aires. And they were the one, he's actually said this, they were, when he would listen to a woman talk about her situation, he realized for the first time that whether or not she was married, or whether or not she was, properly ordered in the structures of the church, meant nothing compared to the simple struggle to survive for herself and her children. That actually is an example he lifts up on the question of whether divorced and remarried people should receive communion. How can you deny that woman communion? In other words, the experience he sees and has with that woman trumps the doctrine that says that woman is excommunicated. And it's he, by his own account, it's his experience of those people that changed him, that prompted him when he became the Archbishop of Buenos Aires to sell the palace, move into an apartment, sell the car, start taking the streetcar. All of that years before he became a national figure or a world figure. A simple, the experience of these people, God's poor, means, which is why he sees, so his wonderful climate change encyclical, which if you haven't read, you really owe it to yourself to read, what's magnificent about it and sets it apart from all of the other commentary about the climate crisis is that his starting point and his ending point are, what is this crisis doing to the world's impoverished? And they are the ones who are not protected from it in any way. The war in Syria is a war that's a consequence of scarcity, environmental scarcity. He sees that, etc. Other comments?
Piggybacking on the first question, the longevity of this movement, because it began with Pope John the 23rd, some opening, and then we reverted back to other conservative understandings of church doctrine in the Catholic Church. Do we see this as a continuation of that more liberal movement in the church, or is there a pattern of reverting back?
The reverting back doesn't actually surprise me or really bother me. And the reason I say that is because the reverting back actually is a signal of how important and profound the change we're talking about is. If this change from a church of power to a church of the poor, or from a church of the just war to a church of peace, if this change were easily made, it wouldn't matter. That it's difficult to make it is what signals how important it is. And this change has been underway for hundreds of years. That's why I'm going back to Galileo. Galileo was an opening. Copernicus was a priest, for goodness sake. The great insight, what scientists call the paradigm shift of the modern era, begins with a priest who's rejected by the church. And the church sets itself against modernity at that point and curses itself. And that's true of the Christian church and centrally of Roman Catholicism. But the church has been in resistance to its own mistake down through the centuries. And the history of it is tragic. It's tragic. And so there might have been movement in the church's understanding of itself, might have accepted the great human breakthrough of the Enlightenment, of democracy, democratic liberalism, pluralism, letting other people be other people. Why is that so hard? That's the meaning of pluralism. The church turned itself against pluralism. There's only one way. Our privilege is the curse, of course, is that we live in the time of the Holocaust, which was the great revelation of the mistake. And it's no accident that after the Holocaust, the church in Europe died, Protestant and Catholic. After the Holocaust, the church in the United States has been at the mercy of the temptation to fundamentalism, Catholic fundamentalism included. Pope John was a great figure, a prophetic figure of saying we must attend to what the Holocaust means to us, our failure, and the doctrines that were complicit in it, especially anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism, but not just that. Our entire rejection of the democratic idea, in the name not of God, but in the name of a medieval monarchical system. The monarchy, the commitment of the church to the monarchy model, which in the Catholic tradition has still gripped us, that's another way to talk about Francis's revolution. What does it mean that he's in that, the Marriott Inn, or the Holiday Inn in the Vatican, which is the Vatican guest house, his apartment, where he was staying as a routine visitor for the time of the conclave, his 2-room apartment. Think of a Holiday Inn. What does it mean that he didn't move from that 2-room apartment into the Renaissance palace decorated by Michelangelo and Bernini? What does it mean that he didn't make that move? What does it mean that every night he has his evening meal in the cafeteria line. There he goes, the guy in the white robe, with his tray. With his tray. Where will he sit? What does it mean? I mean, when he visits the United States of America, that line of Cadillac Escalades, the black SUVs, 10 there and 10 there, and in the middle, the little Fiat. What does that mean? You know, there is. Yes.
So, Jim, excuse me. Go ahead with the mic.
What do you think it means, this rapprochement between the Orthodox and the Vatican? That's a split that goes back some time.
Yeah, I'm sure your thought would be as significant as mine. What occurs to me, of course, is that I do think of Pope John the 23rd meeting with Nikita Khrushchev's nephew in 1960, which shocked people. The Pope meeting with a prominent communist from Moscow. What's happening on the world stage today that has weight for the human future? The possible return of a Cold War with Russia. I mean, in my view, that transcends almost all of the other geopolitical problems we face in its possibility, because, of course, neither the United States nor Russia have completed the great opportunity we had of nuclear disarmament. So for me, it's a signal of Pope Francis's engagement at the things that matter most. And it's wonderful that it happens in Havana, because, of course, Havana is the symbol of the American refusal, inability to let go of Cold War categories still. The Cold War imagination is still gripping us so powerfully. We've slipped Muslims into the slot where communists were. And so for the Pope to actually, while passing through Havana on the way to Mexico, have the first meeting in 1,000 years with the Russian, he's met several times with the patriarch from Constantinople, but with the Russian patriarch is hugely promising. And, President Obama's his two great achievements in foreign policy, I would say, are rapprochement with Cuba and his leadership and success in the Paris climate talks, both of which were enabled in important ways by Pope Francis.
So, Jim,
Yeah.
I'm going to break faith a little bit with yours and my agreement that you were going to talk about the Pope, because I feel like I'd cheat my people if I didn't ask you a question about your assessment of the state of American democracy. I know that you care very, very deeply about the political order and the moral order. So could you give us 5 minutes, please, friend?
Well, I'm reminded of what Gandhi said when asked about the state of Christianity, and he said it would be a great idea, they should try it. I'd be the first to say I have no wisdom on the subject beyond everybody in this room, the thinking, the worrying that we have to do now. I am not one of those who believes that things are worse than ever or about to get worse than ever, however, because I am a child of the Cold War. And I do remember very, very clearly the world into which I came of age. Some of you do too, which was a world absolutely hovering on the brink of nuclear winter. And that's something to be afraid of. Getting blown out of the sky in an airplane by a bomb. Sorry, I brought that up to myself because I have to fly on Monday, and now I'll worry about it. But that is not an existential dilemma for the human species. And that human beings found it possible, including my father, who was a senior Pentagon official, that human beings, with all of our weaknesses, flaws, blindnesses, prejudices, bigotries, that human beings found it possible to step back from that abyss, bit by bit, over 30 years, with the climactic steps back from the abyss taken by, of all people, Ronald Reagan, that could happen must inform our hope, because it shouldn't have been able to happen. By every rational measure, we had so prepared for and moved toward nuclear war with our over 100,000 nuclear weapons between the two sides. We had so prepared for it that it was all but inevitable. My father was convinced it was inevitable. And it wasn't. And in 1989, 90, 91, this golden moment came to us. Not from magic, it wasn't a gift from God, it was a gift from human beings, mostly grassroots human beings. On our side of the Iron Curtain, a movement called the Nuclear Freeze. On the other side of the Iron Curtain, a movement called, generated by and starting Solidarity, nonviolent movements of citizens saying no more of this, which had its consequence. That's American world democracy. And that is still possible. That is still possible. Even so, we're at a grave moment. We're at a grave moment, and we know what to pray for. So we have time for one more, maybe.
Yes. Where's the mic? Right here, Bob. Just keep your hand up so he can. Oh, he sees you.
My question, Jim, has to do with the impact, if any, that that Pope Francis is having on the Roman Catholic clergy and bishops. Are we seeing any signs at all? Are sermons a little more contemporary? Is the newspaper close by the Bible? Are there changes that you can see as a result of what the Pope is obviously saying to the clergy?
Well, the Catholic Church is like the United States Senate. Well, there are the far right nutcases, and there are the far left nutcases. There's a vast population. The priesthood is like that. There are people who are appalled by Pope Francis, the way there are politicians who are appalled by the arrival of President Obama. And there are people who are there are bishops and senior figures in the Vatican Curia, from all reports, who are looking for ways to undermine him. But the attitude of the clergy, and remember, the clergy has been defined over the last 2 generations by right-wing popes appointing right-wing bishops, promoting right-wing priests. Liberal, left-leaning, self-critical, enlightenment-oriented, post-Vatican II clergy have left the priesthood, left the sisterhood to some large extent, although the convents, the orders of religious women, have continued to be the single largest hope for a changed church. And that's very clear when you get the male-dominated curia launching an unjust inquisition at American nuns. And it took, one would have liked to have seen Francis kind of sweep that away with a great gesture. He allowed it to die a quiet death, having privately, according to the testimony of the sisters' leaders, privately assured them that it was going to die. The institution of the Catholic Church, more than 1 billion people, no offense, not bragging, more than 1 billion people across the planet, bridging every divide in the human experience. The most intellectually sophisticated people, except for the Episcopalians, the most intellectually sophisticated people at one end, the vast populations of the illiterate on the other, technologically savvy, technologically deprived, the richest, the poorest, geographic north, south, Europe, Africa. This Catholic Church is being moved by this man. And it has profound importance for the human future just in time. Because I'll tell you, the 21st century would be more threatened by a fundamentalist Roman Catholic Church than it is threatened by a fundamentalist Islam. And that's where we were headed. We were headed toward fundamentalism. It's fundamentalist to say you can't ordain women because none of the 12 was a female. Hello, none of the 12 was an Irishman either. No, really. So, but the last word is the bad news and the good news both, which is it's a very human story. And in our tradition, that's the glory of it. Because when God becomes a human being, it's one of us. It's one of us. That's the glory of it.
So here's the drill. Here's the drill. Jim and I are going to exit the Bat Cave exit here to get him up. If you haven't been to church, you don't want to miss the best Lenten sermon in the history of Lenten sermons at 11:15. Number 2, you can pick up books from which I've been plagiarizing sermons for 20 years. And now will you join me in thanking Jim for being such a resource for All Saints Church for 20 years?